Good morning. This is the City Planning Commission public meeting held at Spector Hall, 22 Reade Street. Today is Wednesday, October 18, 2017. As a courtesy during the proceedings, we ask that you please turn off all cell phones and beepers. All speakers should fill out a speaker's card. In addition, we ask that those providing testimony please identify yourself, limit your remarks to 3 minutes, and speak clearly into the microphone. I will now call the roll. Chair Lago.
Here.
Vice Chair Knuckles.
Here.
Commissioner Besser. Here. Commissioner Cerullo.
Here.
Commissioner De La Uz.
Here.
Commissioner Dweck.
Here.
Commissioner Edie. Commissioner Efron.
Here.
Commissioner Knight.
Here.
Commissioner Levin.
Here.
Commissioner Marin. Commissioner Ortiz.
Here.
A quorum is present. The first item is the approval of the minutes of the regular meeting of Wednesday, October 4th, 2017.
On the minutes, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Minutes are adopted.
Scheduling on calendar numbers 1 through 11, we have resolutions for adoption. Scheduling Wednesday, November 1st, 2017, for a public hearing to be held at Spector Hall, 22 Reade Street.
On the resolution, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Resolution is adopted. Resolutions are adopted.
The next part of the calendar is the report section on page 8. Borough of the Bronx, calendar numbers 12 and 13. Calendar number 12, CD9, C170392, ZMX. Calendar number 13, N170393, ZRX. In the matter of applications for zoning map and zoning text amendments concerning 1965 Lafayette Avenue rezoning. For favorable reports on calendar numbers 12 and 13, Chair Lago.
Yes.
Vice Chairman Knuckles.
Yes.
Commissioner Besser. Yes. Commissioner Cerullo.
Yes.
Commissioner De La Uz.
Yes.
Commissioner Dweck.
Yes.
Commissioner Efron.
Yes.
Commissioner Knight.
Yes.
Commissioner Levin.
Yes.
Commissioner Marin.
Here. Yes.
Commissioner Ortiz.
Yes.
Favorable reports have been adopted on calendar numbers 12 and 13. Borough of the Bronx, calendar numbers 14, 15, and 16. Calendar number 14, CD11, C170445, ZMX. Calendar number 15, N170446, ZRX. Calendar number 16, C170447, ZSX. In the matter of applications for map and zoning text amendments and for the grant of a special permit concerning 1776 East Chester Road. For favorable reports on calendar numbers 14, 15, and 16. Chair Lago.
Yes.
Vice Chairman Knuckles.
Yes.
Commissioner Besser.
Yes.
Commissioner Cerullo.
Yes.
Commissioner De La Uz.
Yes.
Commissioner Dweck.
Yes.
Commissioner Efron.
Yes.
Commissioner Knight.
Yes.
Commissioner Levin.
Yes.
Commissioner Marin.
Yes.
Commissioner Ortiz.
Yes.
Favorable reports have been adopted on calendar numbers 14, 15, and 16. Borough of Manhattan, calendar numbers 17, 18, and 19. Calendar number 17, CD11, C170442, ZMM. Calendar number 18, N170443, ZRM. Calendar number 19, C170444, ZSM. In the matter of applications for zoning map and zoning text amendments and for the grant of a special permit concerning the National Black Theater. For favorable reports on calendar numbers 17, 18, and 19, Chair Lago.
Yes.
Vice Chairman Knuckles.
In the memory of my good friend, Dr. Barbara Antia, I vote yes.
Commissioner Besser.
Yes.
Commissioner Cerullo.
Yes.
Commissioner De La Uz.
Yes.
Commissioner Dweck.
Yes.
Commissioner Efron.
Yes.
Commissioner Knight.
Yes.
Commissioner Levin.
Yes.
Commissioner Marin.
Yes.
Commissioner Ortiz.
Yes.
Favorable reports have been adopted on calendar numbers 17, 18, and 19. Borough of Manhattan, calendar number 20, CD5, N180078, HKM. In the matter of a communication concerning the landmark designation of the New York Public Library interiors. On the adoption of calendar number 20 for referral to the City Council. Chair Lago.
Yes.
Vice Chairman Knuckles.
Yes.
Commissioner Besser.
Yes.
Commissioner Cerullo.
Yes.
Commissioner De La Uz.
Yes.
Commissioner Dweck.
Yes.
Commissioner Efron.
Yes.
Commissioner Knight.
Yes.
Commissioner Levin.
Yes.
Commissioner Marin.
Yes.
Commissioner Ortiz.
Yes.
A favorable report has been adopted on calendar number 20. Borough of Staten Island, calendar number 21, CD3, N170462, RCR. In the matter of an application for the grant of a certification concerning 28, 30, 32, and 34 Bamberger Lane for adoption on calendar number 21. Chair Lago,
Yes.
Vice Chairman Knuckles.
Yes.
Commissioner Bessa. Commissioner Cerullo,
Yes.
Commissioner Delauss,
Yes.
Commissioner Dweck,
Yes.
Commissioner Efron,
Yes.
sorry, Commissioner Edie,
Yes.
Commissioner Efron,
Yes.
Commissioner Knight,
Yes.
Commissioner Levin,
Yes.
Commissioner Marin,
Yes.
Commissioner Ortiz.
Yes.
Calendar number 21 has been adopted. Excuse me. Calendar number 22, Borough of Manhattan, calendar number 22, CD3 N170497 RCR, in the matter of an application for the grant of a certification concerning 131 Rathbone Avenue for adoption on calendar number 22. Chair Lago,
I'll just note that it is a Staten Island matter, not Manhattan. Yes.
I said Manhattan, I'm sorry. And I do have Staten Island, sorry.
About Manhattan today.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Chair Lago.
Yes.
Okay. Vice Chair Knuckles?
Yes.
Commissioner Bessa? Commissioner Cerullo?
Yes.
Commissioner Delauss?
Yes.
Commissioner Dweck?
Yes.
Commissioner Edie?
Yes, and also, if Madam Chair, if I may be recorded as yes on votes 12 through 19 and recused on 20.
Recuse on 20?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Efron?
Yes.
Commissioner Knight?
Yes.
Commissioner Levin?
Yes.
Commissioner Marin?
Yes.
Commissioner Ortiz?
Yes.
Calendar number 22 has been adopted. Borough of Staten Island, calendar number 23 concerning 7088 Amboy Road. This item has been laid over. Borough of Staten Island, calendar number 24, CD3 N170448 RCR, in the matter of an application for the grant of a certification concerning 146 Sprague Avenue for adoption on calendar number 24. Chair Lago,
Yes.
Vice Chairman Knuckles.
Yes.
Commissioner Bessa.
Yes.
Commissioner Cerullo.
Yes.
Commissioner Delauss.
Yes.
Commissioner Dweck.
Yes.
Commissioner Edie.
Yes,
Commissioner Efron.
Yes.
Commissioner Knight.
Yes.
Commissioner Levin.
Yes.
Commissioner Marin.
Yes.
Commissioner Ortiz.
Yes.
Calendar number 24 has been adopted. Borough of Staten Island, calendar number 25, CD3 N180040 RCR, in the matter of an application for the grant of a certification concerning 57 Canton Avenue for adoption on calendar number 25. Chair Lago,
Yes.
Vice Chairman Knuckles.
Yes.
Commissioner Bessa.
Yes.
Commissioner Cerullo.
Yes.
Commissioner Delauss.
Yes.
Commissioner Dweck.
Yes.
Commissioner Edie.
yes,
Commissioner Efron.
Yes.
Commissioner Knight.
Yes.
Commissioner Levin.
Yes.
Commissioner Marin.
Yes.
Commissioner Ortiz.
Yes.
Calendar number 25 has been adopted. Borough of Staten Island, calendar number 26, CD3 N180049 RCR, in the matter of an application for the grant of a certification concerning 41 and 43 Ramblewood Avenue for adoption on calendar number 26. Chair Lago.
Yes.
Vice Chairman Knuckles.
Yes.
Commissioner Bessa. Commissioner Cerullo.
Yes.
Commissioner Delauss.
Yes.
Commissioner Dweck.
Yes.
Commissioner Edie.
yes,
Commissioner Efron.
Yes.
Commissioner Knight.
Yes.
Commissioner Levin.
Yes.
Commissioner Marin.
Yes.
Commissioner Ortiz.
Yes.
Calendar number 26 has been adopted. The next part of the calendar is the public hearing section on page 34. Borough of Manhattan, calendar number 27, CD6 N180082 ZRM. A public hearing in the matter of an application for a zoning text amendment concerning the East River 50s Sutton Place.
What we'll do for this hearing, and Commissioner Cerullo is recused. What we will do for this public hearing is have 10 speakers in support, 10 speakers in opposition, and we'll go back and forth in groups of 10, beginning with Councilmember Kalos.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning.
I think the City Planning Commission needs a larger space for your hearings, especially ones like this, so we offer the chambers if you ever need them. This moment has been 2.5 years in the making, and actually probably goes back to when I served on Community Planning Board 8. And I think so many people throughout the city have been a little frustrated by a lot of the super tall, super skinny buildings. And I just had a primary election, and I spoke to thousands and thousands of residents in person and on the phone. And the tips of their tongues after the Marine Transfer Station, which they categorically oppose, is concerns about overdevelopment. I'm here today in support of the community-led grassroots rezoning application submitted to the Commission by the East River 50s Alliance in partnership with Manhattan Borough President Gail Brewer, State Senator Liz Krueger, Councilmember Dan Grodnick, and I. IRFA, the community coalition leading this application, consists of 45 buildings represented by co-op boards, condo boards, individual owners, and over 2,600 individual supporters living in more than 500 buildings within and beyond the rezoning area. I want to thank Commissioner and Chair Lago, Vice Chair Knuckles, and members of the City Planning Commission and your staff for hearing us today. I want to thank our Congressmember Carolyn Maloney for her support and 2,000 residents who are part of this effort. And in order to respect your time, we asked only a few of the folks to come out today. I'm not sure if this was an error. We could have asked all 2,000 to come and had a much longer day, but we had reached out and we thought we would have about 8 or so to speak on behalf of the community. If at any point you feel you'd like the rest, we will send out a mail blast and ask a couple of thousand people to come down tonight. So just please let us know about that. In the Sutton area, we have a small residential neighborhood by the East River in Midtown Manhattan. We've come together to envision a community that welcomes new construction that provides real housing for real New Yorkers, including affordable housing, instead of 800-foot high, full-story penthouses built to serve as investments, often for foreign billionaire speculators. We envision a residential community in the Sutton area where new buildings serve the needs of the local community and of the city as a whole, adding to our housing stock for working people and fitting the shape and character of our neighborhood. We've seen super tall buildings at 432 Park and at 111 West 57th Street, and we believe they have no role on quiet side streets in fully residential neighborhoods. When I first learned that the super tall buildings could creep onto our residential side streets, I wanted to do something that had not been done before. To organize the community to propose our own plan to rezone the neighborhood for the present and the future. That is what we did. Led by residents from the Sutton area and co-signed by 4 elected officials, we filed the first ever community-led rezoning at City Planning, which we're discussing here today. This rezoning corrects an accident of history that has left the Sutton area as the only residential neighborhood in the city with an uncapped R10 zoning without any type of contextual protection or tower on a base zoning. This makes the neighborhood uniquely vulnerable to the development of super tall towers, a building form that was neither contemplated nor feasible when the R10 district was created in 1961. To provide context for the East River 50s, roughly the area between 52nd and 58th Street, east of First Avenue, the proposal seeks to impose tower on a base zoning, which would result in squatter, more human-scale buildings with a dense base and a shorter tower, adding more units to our housing stock, which will be filled by real New Yorkers. Tower on a base zoning achieves this by requiring new buildings to pack roughly half of the building into a base under 150 feet, leaving limited FAR for a tower, thus restricting its height. Towers are restricted to 30 to 40% of the zoning lot, and buildings must feature 15-foot setbacks and rear yard of 30 feet. In the East 50s, this would result in squatter buildings with more residential units matching the built context of the zoning area.
And I'll actually note that for the balance of the hearing, I'll hold people strictly to 3 minutes, but we'll continue our tradition of allowing our elected officials to speak as they want.
I appreciate it. I'll just cut to my conclusion. My testimony is 5 pages. I hope that you'll take the time to read it. The plan is the culmination of 2 years of effort from community residents, supportive civic organizations, Community Board 6, elected officials, Department of City Planning professional staff, and it reflects changes in response to those concerns raised by public comment by Chair Lago, as well as technical meetings and letters by department staff. I hope the City Planning Commission will appreciate the good faith in which we've presented our application and will respond to the chair and staff's feedback and will support this community-led rezoning. I urge the commission to vote in favor of this proposal. I'm happy to take any questions.
Questions from the commission? Yes, Commissioner Ortiz.
Hi, thank you very much for your testimony. I'm curious about sort of the objective here and the origins of the objective. And could you speak to, I mean, I certainly share some of the concerns about the skinny buildings that I've seen around the city that are quite tall and out of scale. But to what degree is this proposal in response to any particular project versus something that, came from a more general concern about those issues?
So I got elected January 1st, 2014. Department of City Planning gets a call from me about wanting to work together on bringing context and scale to my district. So this has been something I want to do and I still want to do. I hope that we're able to do a lot of great work here today in the East River 50s, and I hope to come back to, and in fact we'll be meeting very soon with Department of City Planning about similar concerns on the Upper East Side. We have height protections on 5th Avenue, Madison Avenue, Park Avenue, Lexington Avenue, but there are no height protections on 3rd, 2nd, 1st, or York. We do have height protections on East End. And I think this is a city, it is beautiful. We have beautiful tall buildings in commercial neighborhoods, and we don't really have people living there. We've had a little bit of permeation where we do have mixed use, where we have commercial and residential in the commercial core. But largely we have commercial districts and residential districts. And so the genesis of this is trying to make sure that as technology changes, our zoning code gets updated from 1961 to reflect the changes that are happening today, and making sure that when people are building something, that the people who move in are actually New Yorkers, and that those who are being displaced will actually be able to move back into the new units. So overall, this has been a reaction from, at least in my part, to the super talls and the buildings for billionaires, and wanting to protect my tenants, like my rent-regulated tenants like Herndon Worth and Charles Fernandez, who are being offered buyouts and harassed out of their rent-regulated units, and just trying to be a part of the mayor's affordable housing plan. And I think throughout the city, development is going to happen, but we'd rather see that development in scale, in context with the neighborhoods. And so this was the first example, and we were able to organize, and that's why it's an 8-block region. And when we saw what was happening, we were able to see that there were additional soft sites for development. And so this was a place to start, but I will tell you, we are not finished, and it is not about this site. It is about residential neighborhoods as a whole.
Thank you.
Other questions? Thank you, Council Member.
My pleasure.
Our next speaker in support is Karen Mira.
Good morning, Chair Lago, members of the Commission. I'm going to stray a bit from my prepared comments because I think Councilmember Callos very eloquently covered some of the points I was going to touch on. But I'm from Carter, Ledyard, and Milburn, and we represent the applicants here for this text amendment. So the applicants seek the Commission's support for a text amendment that would change the height and bulk regulations that apply to new development in the area. And that's the R10 portions of blocks surrounded by East 59th Street, 1st Avenue, 51st Street, and the East River. As the council member mentioned, the current R10 zoning, which was enacted over 56 years ago, allows the construction of standard towers on narrow streets. And decades ago, those rules produced buildings that were 250 to 500 feet high, and you can see that in the built context of this neighborhood, which has some standard towers. But recent advances make it possible to use those rules to build much, much taller, and you all understand that. But I want to reemphasize that this is the only residential area that still has those rules that apply to narrow streets. And those rules don't even apply to the wide streets in this area. And on the wide streets, you have to apply tower on a base rules. So it's really quite unusual and, as the council member said, an accident of history that these towers can be built in a residential neighborhood. And it's not a choice that this commission has affirmatively made for any residential area. Extremely tall towers do not match the character. I want to spend a few minutes talking about the character. I know Bob Tuttle reviewed that during the review session when this was referred out. But to be clear, the predominant building type in this neighborhood is mid-rise residential apartment buildings, 14 to 20 stories. Over 87% of the buildings in this area comply with quality housing height limits. And that means 185 feet on narrow streets and 210 feet on wide streets. So think about that. 87% of the buildings are 210 or less. There are some towers, as I mentioned earlier, about 8% of the buildings are towers that are over 300 feet tall, but none of those is over 500 feet, and most of them are in the 315 to 386 foot range. So just to put in context, an 800 or 900 foot tall building, clearly 4 times higher than the predominant context and much higher than the highest buildings. So what do we propose to do about this? After working very hard on options for addressing this concern, while also taking into account the city's very real need to plan for future housing, and to work with its planning goals, we came up with a proposal to apply a modified version of tower on a base that already applies on wide streets in this district and tailor it to the narrow streets.
I'm afraid we're going to have to ask you to stop the testimony at this point and take
Thank you.
questions from commissioners.
Yes.
Commissioner Delahoo's.
Thank you.
Can you please continue with the sentence that you were about to?
I was just going to say that tower on a base has no absolute height limits. It controls scale through minimum tower coverage requirements and packing rules, but it produces buildings that can absorb quite a bit of FAR, and we think strike a balance between protecting the neighborhood character while also allowing housing to be built.
Great, thank you.
Other questions? Thank you, Ms. Mayor. Our next speaker in support is Alan Kirsch.
Good morning, Chair Lago and members of the City Planning Commission. My name is Alan Kirsch, and I am the president of the East River 50s Alliance, also known as IRFA. My organization is a co-applicant with elected officials on the rezoning application that is the subject of today's hearing. As many of you have heard, we had a rude awakening 2.5 years ago when we learned that our local zoning would allow the construction of a 1,000-foot tower mid-block on a narrow, quiet residential street. To put that news in context, I want to emphasize that the majority of the existing buildings in our neighborhood are mid-rise with 14 to 20 stories. We quickly discovered that towers of unlimited height are permitted as of right on every narrow street in the East River 50s. We also learned that the East River 50s is the only residential neighborhood in the city still zoned R10 without any type of height control and contextual protections. It is thus uniquely vulnerable to as-of-right development of super tall towers, a building form that wasn't contemplated when the R10 district was created in 1961. This is an anomaly that luxury housing developers identified and want to exploit. Residential side streets in all other neighborhoods in the city are protected against super tall towers by lower density zoning designations, contextual protections, or both. We are simply asking for protections that every other residential neighborhood in New York City has already received. Thus began our over 2-year effort to fight these out-of-context developments and encourage the creation of additional affordable housing within our neighborhood. We eagerly and wholeheartedly embraced a steep learning curve as we retained at our own expense experts in city planning, land use, and environmental issues. With this team, we explored options to right-size the zoning in our community while still allowing new housing development for a growing city. Our effort quickly received the support of many elected officials and civic organizations. IRFA's membership grew to include 45 buildings represented by co-op boards, condo boards, and individual owners, and over 2,600 individual supporters living in more than 500 buildings within and beyond the rezoning area. All of us together seek to defend the East River 50s community against out-of-scale development that clashes with community character and tends to produce very few, very large, very expensive apartments that do little to address the city's housing needs. IRF and its applicants have been working with the Department of City Planning for over 2 years to develop an application that could address these concerns, align with the city's larger planning goals, and ultimately earn your support. After countless meetings, planning studies, and airing of concerns on earlier proposals, we are confident that the current application achieves the first 2 goals and are hopeful that it achieves the third. Our zoning text amendment to apply modified tower and base rules in lieu of standard tower zoning regulations for narrow streets will result in new development across the district that is consistent with neighborhood context and built character. The amendment's minimum tower coverage requirements, modified packing rules, and base height and setback rules will prevent unlimited zoning lot mergers and the development of mega towers while providing more than enough room to facilitate and encourage housing development.
Thank you, Mr. Kirsch. Questions? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Our next speaker in support is Judith Carrington.
Chair of the City Planning Commission, City Planning Commissioners, my name is Judith Carrington. I reside at 345 East 57, just outside the zoning district. I'm a 20-year resident of the 13-block East River 50s, to which I am greatly attached for its history, charm, and it allows me as a senior to walk anywhere I need to, any need I may have. Now, what I would like to do is tell, at this important juncture, share a brief story with the commissioners. Once upon a time, on a hill, there was a neighborhood which bespoke decrepitude despite its preponderance of landmarked buildings. One day, a tall, out-of-scale tower appeared in their midst. It didn't relate to any structure in the area. In shock, the residents discovered that due to an aberration of the zoning law, their side streets were zoned R10, as would be appropriate for the avenues. They realized they could have towers of unlimited height popping up on all their side streets. So they formed a community group and they developed a rezoning plan. They piled into buses to the City Planning Commission public hearings to advocate for the R8 zoning correction for their side streets. They felt they deserved it, and indeed, they should have had it in the first place. The result, in the 70s, the City Planning Commission agreed, and Carnegie Hill neighborhood became one of the most expensive and thriving residential areas in Manhattan, an example of community initiative setting a good precedent for the city. We applaud the City Planning Commission similarly for their vision today. The Commission has proven to work with our community voices to develop a zoning proposal that can work for all parties. And we are grateful for your fair and thoughtful deliberations and decisions made in good conscience. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Greenberg. Questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker in support is Minette Greenberg.
Good morning, Chairman Lagos and commission members. My name is Minette Greenberg, and I live at 60 Sutton Place South and East 53rd Street. That's the southernmost tip of our Sutton Place neighborhood. Every person in this room who grew up in New York City grew up in a neighborhood, maybe the East Village, Harlem, perhaps Pelham Bay, Belmont Avenue. Possibly you live in Park Slope, like our mayor, or Bensonhurst, Brooklyn, Jackson Heights, Stapleton. Wherever you're from, they are all New York City communities, made up of people who become neighbors. And you know, it's people who bring a community to life by interacting with each other and the amenities in the area. You and me We shopped in local stores. We even knew the owners. You went to local schools. You played in nearby parks. Each neighborhood, over time, developing its own special flavor. Like Sutton Place, our neighborhood. In the Sutton Place community, we shop in local stores. And yes, we know the owners, and we send our children to the local schools. We watch them play in our small local parks. We are a neighborhood. Recently, we learned that our neighborhood is threatened by the construction of huge super towers, impersonal towers, which will destroy our sense of community. Although the Sutton neighborhood is a community within New York City, it feels like a small town. Allowing super towers in, it reduces light and air. They create no open spaces, and they're vastly different from neighboring buildings. They destroy the architectural fabric that makes our neighborhood unique. They diminish the sense of community that the area's residents, and we believe the commissioners, value. How could out-of-scale towers spring up in our midst? Here's what we learned. Zoning for the city's other residential neighborhoods have more controls on building height and size than ours. We are not asking for any special treatment. We are only asking for what every other residential neighborhood in New York City already has. Reasonable controls on out-of-scale development. Then they can work as they were meant to, helping neighborhoods function as warm family and child-friendly communities. We are asking you to cast your vote on the side of communities for the people who live here in New York City. The R10 zoning for our neighborhood was adopted in 1961. Nobody at that time ever envisioned mega towers encroaching upon our streets. It's time to update that archaic law to reflect the needs and wants of today's residents.
Thank you, Ms. Greenberg. And if you'd like to submit your letter, we would gladly enter it into the record. Questions? Thank you. Our next speaker in support is Carol Whitten.
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Carol Whitten. I live at 434 East 58th Street. I am a real New Yorker. I was born in Manhattan, grew up in Stuyvesant Town before it became fancy. I'm the product of the New York City Public Schools. I was raised in the middle class. I am still a proud member of the middle class. I am not rich. I am a recently retired New York City public school teacher, and I taught mostly pre-K and K, pre-kindergarten and kindergarten. And I want to keep things very simple. When you're teaching small children, you don't do ratios. That's high school. Here we go, the visual. This is what Gamma is proposing. I'm in the blue building immediately next to it. Councilman Callis mentioned Herndon Worth. Mr. Worth lives in the blue building. Mr. Charles Fernandez, a retired NYU security guard, not a rich man, lives in this building. That's the 90-story tower. This is what we look like next to a 67-story tower. Still way out of scale. This is what we look like with a 35-story tower. Makes a lot more sense. I don't know architectural drawings. I can't interpret them. It's beyond me. I taught little kids. This I understand. They tore down 3 walk-up tenements. That's why the yellow in the middle is 3, because it's taking up space. We're all approximately 20 feet, and they're 60 feet. So, to keep it real simple, 90 stories, Mega, wrong. 67 stories, mega, wrong. 35 stories, just right. I beg you to please do the right thing for our neighborhood. Look at it this way. Let's keep it simple. Thank you.
Those were some very fortunate children that you taught over the years who are extremely effective.
Thank you.
Questions for Ms. Witten? Thank you. Our next speaker in support is Danny Gold.
That's a very tough act to follow. And I'm sorry I don't have any visuals to present to you, but I'm just a resident of Sutton Place. My name is Danny Gold, and I live at 45 Sutton Place South between East 54th and 55th Street, a 20-story building. And my building has supported the IRFA proposal. I do not live at the Sovereign apartment building, which is several blocks away, but I wanted to express my personal support for this rezoning to demonstrate to the Planning Commission that this proposal is not just supported by people living across the street from the proposed mega tower or the people living right next door in those little tiny houses, but from the entire neighborhood. And as you've been demonstrated this morning by quite a few people, thousands of people in the neighborhood and dozens of apartment houses, including my own, have all supported this proposal and will be affected by this inappropriately sized building for our area. And as you've heard, our neighborhood seems to be the only area in all of New York City's 5 boroughs that does not restrict heights in mid-blocks. And every other neighborhood seems to have these height restrictions. So I urge your support for this rezoning proposal. I'd also like to express the support from a member of the board of 25 Sutton Place South, which is between East 55th and 56th. Unfortunately, because of prior commitments, he was unable to attend, but he expresses his personal support for this proposal, and his building, another 20-story building at 25 Sutton Place South, has significantly contributed to IRFA and has expressed their support for the IRFA proposals. Thank you.
Questions for Mr. Gold? Thank you. Our next speaker in support is Lori Kupfer.
Good morning. My name is Lori Kupfer, and I reside with my husband at 60 Sutton Place South, where we have lived for the past 5 years. My husband and I are both architects, and it doesn't take an architect to understand the contextual issues that we are concerned about in our neighborhood regarding mega towers. Any great neighborhood in the world, from London to Madrid to Barcelona to Paris, has contextual texture, as do great cities in such as San Francisco and Chicago, and our own New York City, where we have Soho, the East Village, the West Village, Nolita, and other wonderful neighborhoods that we define as neighborhoods because of their contextual consistency. So I am very much in favor of the zoning amendment that's been brought before you, and I hope that you will help preserve our Sutton Place neighborhood as a great neighborhood in New York City and help to maintain New York City as a great city made of great neighborhoods. Thank you.
Questions for Ms. Kupfer? Thank you. Our next speaker in support is Evan Cassis.
Good morning, and thank you for your time. I'm not the best public speaker, so please bear with me. I just felt it was important that I be here. My name is Evan Cassis, and I support the East River 50s rezoning proposal. I feel it's the right thing for our community and still allows the developer to build an apartment building. I currently live at 419 East 57th Street, where I've lived since 2003. I live in the back of the building, and I do not have a view. What originally drew me to this neighborhood was the pre-war charm of the Sutton Place community. I find Sutton Place to be a hidden gem in East Midtown, as there are a number of charming pre-war buildings, tree-lined streets, parks, and family-owned businesses, which make up this beautiful neighborhood and is a quiet getaway from the hustle and bustle of Midtown Manhattan. I was saddened to learn a few years ago that several walk-up apartment buildings built in the early 20th century were taken down so that a mega tower can be built in its place. The buildings which were taken down had character and complemented the neighborhood. I don't doubt how the developer kept these buildings in place and upgraded them with modern amenities that they could have been sold for a profit, and at the same time, preserving the beauty of the buildings and conforming with the neighborhood's character. A mega tower doesn't belong on a narrow street such as East 58th Street or in neighborhoods such as Sutton Place. A crane needed to build a mega tower will take over the block, and I'm concerned with safety issues associated with the size of a crane needed and inclement weather. Great cities such as Paris and London have strict zoning laws which help preserve these cities' beauty, charm, and history. I strongly support East River 50's Alliance plan to rezone our Sutton Place neighborhood. As I said, I don't have a view. I'm here to help try and preserve the character of our community, and I feel like it's a fair plan also for the developer, as they're still allowed to build an apartment building. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions for Ms. Cassis? Thanks. Our next speaker in support is Anastasia Vornas.
Good morning. My name's Anastasia Vornas. I've lived in Midtown East for over 40 years in 4 different buildings. Most recently, my husband and I have lived for over 20 years at 455 East 57th Street, where we own an apartment on the top 3 floors. Our view will not be disturbed one iota by the proposed building on East 58th, as we face entirely front. But I have to say that my concern for preserving the charm and the quality of our neighborhood that I've enjoyed for decades is the reason why I've financially supported IRFA and why I feel so strongly for our neighborhood and our little community that we deserve the protections and the guidelines to future building that the rest of the lovely neighborhoods that comprise New York enjoy. And I hope very much that you will be guided, at least partially, by that. We are kind of trying to play catch-up at this point for reasons none of us understands. Thank you for your time.
Questions for Ms. Vornas? Thank you. We'll now turn to 10 speakers in opposition, beginning with Paul Finnemore.
Just a minute, in order, I was the first speaker.
The first person who signed up was Paul Finnemore?
No, I handed him in, I was the first person to sign up. Federal was 10 speaker. Maybe have it backwards.
No, he's here. We would welcome.
We handed it in. Want to do it that way, it's fine. Good morning, Chair Largo and Commissioners. My name is Paul Finnemore, and I'm an Operations Director for Lend-Lease. Lend-Lease is a construction management firm in New York City, and we have offices all over the world. Since 1979, we've built over 1,700 buildings in New York City, over $48 billion worth of work. We've been ranked number 1 over 8 consecutive years for multi-unit residential buildings. We've been selected by Gamma Real Estate to construct 58 Sutton because of our experience and professionalism in all phases of the project, including working closely with the communities we build them in. Over the years, we've created and earned very positive relationships with the local authorities having jurisdiction in all city municipalities. We've constructed some of the most difficult and challenging projects in the city that the city has ever seen, and we will continue to do so for many years. The 58 Sutton project will provide over 500 jobs for men and women in their respective craft, who will come there every day to work. It will give over 30 local trade contractors business opportunities to grow, not to mention the local delis and sandwich shops up and down First Avenue. As others have noted in their testimony, which is why I was supposed to go a little later, the proposed zoning text amendment seeks only to do one thing, which is to stop this project, which is exactly what it will do. It will leave a big hole in the ground, and it will be abandoned. This will be the blight on the neighborhood, and more devastating is the immediate termination of over 500 men and women who will be gainfully employed there for the next 30 months. It's alarming to me that so many people could be out of work when this construction project is already so far along. I urge you to do the right thing and vote no on this application. Thank you.
Questions for Mr. Fenimore? Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker in opposition is Gary Tarnoff.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair Lago and Commissioners. I'm Gary Tarnoff of Kramer Levin, representing Gamma Real Estate, the developer of the residential building under construction at 428 to 432 East 58th Street. This application should not be approved because it is spot zoning. It's based on an error-filled environmental assessment statement which ignores several impact categories and should never have been deemed complete. It's contrary to the administration's goals of providing affordable housing and is being pushed through the public review process in a rushed, highly suspect manner. The purported intent of the rezoning, as stated in the EAS, is to stop development of tall, over 1,000-foot towers in the city, which it states are a trend throughout Manhattan. The EAS then proceeds to identify one development site, one soft site, our site. I can't think of another example where a neighborhood rezoning identified only one development site. It has been well publicized that this application was initiated and has been pushed by residents who live in the 47-story building located directly across the street from our site, intent on protecting their water views. The admitted fact that our site is the only one affected by the rezoning is a clear evidence of the real intent of this effort. This could potentially be justified, the proposal, if it was part of a well-considered plan. But our view is that it is not. The rezoning area has a built form that is diverse. It includes townhouses, tenements, high street wall apartment buildings, and a number of towers that are not on bases but are set back from the street. In fact, the proposed tower on the base form is the one form that does not exist anywhere within these streets. If the Planning Commission wants to rezone this area, it should take the time to carefully consider appropriate zoning based on the existing context and not rush to adopt a flawed proposal that was very quietly worked out as a compromise with the applicants after their initial proposal was withdrawn. As to the environmental assessment statement, the with action scenario makes an assumption which is preposterous, that Gamma's zoning lot would be subdivided into 3 separate zoning lots, that the air rights would be returned to the original owners, that existing occupied residential buildings with 45 units would be vacated and demolished, and that all of the development rights that Gamma has acquired that were going to be in the proposed building would then be constructed in 3 separate buildings, and that's what's studied in EAS. This is completely unrealistic financially given Gamma's investment here, and is contrary to the secret technical manual, which says that buildings with over 6 units should not be considered soft sites. The reality is that the 14 affordable units that the EAS says will be developed in no action scenario through the inclusionary housing program would not be built at all, since the development rights would not likely be used under the new zoning. I have 30 seconds more if I may finish.
No, sir, I'm afraid we're going to have to cut it off. If you should feel free to submit the letter, which
I will
we'll gladly.
submit my testimony in writing.
Thank you. Questions for Mr. Tarnoff? Yes, Commissioner Deleuze.
Hi, thanks for being here. How long ago did your client acquire the property?
March of 2017.
March of 2017. And
The client acquired it in a sale and bankruptcy. We were the original lender for the prior developer who was not able to complete the project, and we acquired it through a bankruptcy sale to try and recoup our investment.
what was there prior?
What was on the site prior? there were three, I believe there were three tenement buildings.
And the rent-stabilized tenants in those buildings?
Well, if they were there, they were gone before the buildings were demolished. And as I pointed out, the environmental assessment statement of the applicant suggests that additional buildings, additional low-rise buildings on the block would be demolished to make way for a tower on the base. So they suggest that 45 occupied units in these buildings would be demolished, and that's what will be allowed under this proposal. So they're saying there would be two towers, not one tower, creating a 150-foot wall on East 58th Street.
Obviously, I know that the council member mentioned, I believe, some rent-stabilized tenants that he's concerned about, and, certainly it's been my experience, regardless of the methodology in the secret manual, that buildings with 6 or more units are at risk of demolition, especially when there's no height restrictions. So I appreciate your testimony.
Vice Chair Knuckles.
In the event that this resolution were to pass, what would the developer do with the site, in your opinion?
Well, the developer is going forward with this project. We started construction in May. We've completed excavation. We have a full building permit. We are constructing our foundations. We made substantial progress on the foundations. If this passes, we would, and if it passes on the schedule that we understand, that is, passes the City Council before Thanksgiving, which would be the fastest zoning text amendment in history, we would not be able to complete our foundations and invest the project, and we would have to go to the Board of Standards and Appeals and request additional time. If that's granted, we would obviously proceed and finish our foundations and complete it. If it's not, then there will be a hole in the ground. There's simply no way that we could construct this building, given the financial costs that have already been encountered, and given the fact that you'd have to subdivide the lots. It's just not economically feasible.
Commissioner Marin.
Mr. Turnoff, good morning. Question.
Good morning.
Do you know how many buildings were on the site before they were raised, and how many units were in each building?
I believe there were 3. I don't have that number, but I could certainly give it to you. We'll get that number for you, yes.
Thank you.
Other questions? Yes, Commissioner Levin.
Mr. Tarnoff, the case is being made that this is the only the only R10 residential neighborhood in the city that does not have some form of
That's not correct.
contextual. That's why I'm asking the question. Are you aware of other areas?
Yes, I am.
How should we understand that argument? What do you have to say to that?
It's not correct. First of all, you have R10s in the mid-block, R10 equivalents throughout Midtown, and this is Midtown East. So you have the MoMA Tower that's under construction.
Okay, but the argument has been made that those areas are predominantly commercial with some residential mixed in, whereas the difference here is that this one is largely a residential area.
You have the area south of 42nd Street, east of First Avenue, in which you have full blocks all zoned R10. You have the Upper West Side and the Lincoln Square area, which is all zoned R10 in the mid-blocks. It's not unique at all. It's not a predominant form, but there are a number of areas that are R10 in the mid-blocks as well. And those, I think the Commission is right to look at that, obviously, and they should be studied, and there should be an appropriate form of rezoning for each one, but I don't think this is it, and we have additional speakers who will address that as well.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Thank you, Mr. Tarnoff. Our next speaker in opposition is Stanley Schlein.
Good morning, Honorable Commissioners, Chair Lago. Thank you so much for allowing me to speak at this hearing. I'm Stanley Schlein. I also represent GAMA in the development of its proposed building under construction at 428 to 432 East 58th Street. I'm speaking today in opposition to this application and focus particular attention on this absolutely deplorable public process. The initial zoning text amendment application by IRFA was referred to the Commission on June 5, 2017, was discussed, debated, and voted at an evening public hearing within Community Board 6 on June 27. This public hearing was well attended, due in no small part to the fact that notices for this hearing were distributed and posted throughout the community at large. As you know, since that time, the applicant has withdrawn that particular application and submitted a new one that's being considered here today. As you also know, the application is entirely different than the initial one and creates an entirely different approach to this particular community. Rather than an arbitrary height limit, the application now calls for a tower on base form, which is mapped in other areas of the city but not on the narrow streets, with different bulk packing percentages. The new application will also cover a larger area of the Sutton Place neighborhood than the one reviewed at the Community Board 6 public hearing in June. However, as stated by Mr. Tarnoff, both Community Board 6 and the Borough President waived their review period of the new application at an unannounced caucus at the full board meeting on September 13th and without any public presentation or public discussion of the application. Although this is not illegal, it is unprecedented. It is very much unprecedented. This is an alarming abdication of responsibility to the public. But let's be frank here, and Commissioner Ortiz, I think, raised it as her initial question. What is the purpose of this particular text amendment? Every witness who has testified so far in support of this application made it abundantly clear, either directly or in the middle of their presentation. This is to stop a single development, a single building. This is not appropriate zoning policy whatsoever. These residents of the Sovereign and Urfa want to stop the development of our building because they do not want their views blocked. And their race to beat the clock, they have succeeded in influencing Community Board 6 and the Borough President not only to get on board to support a spot zoning text amendment, but to waive their responsibility to the local community to hold a public hearing. It is shocking that certain elected officials who have already testified are party to this highly opaque manner of voting and not have a public hearing on the neighborhood-wide rezoning. These are the same individuals who have been among the most vociferous advocates of a more transparent process. I urge this commission not to engage in this process. I urge you to defer your vote that is currently scheduled for November 1. It is not too late to allow a public and transparent process. Commissioner Kalo said 2,000 people are available. Let them come to a subsequent hearing. We thank you for your time.
Questions for Mr. Schlein?
Sure.
Yes, Commissioner Delos.
Thanks for being here. I appreciate you raising the concerns about process. The one thing I would note is that community boards and borough presidents have waived in the past, most recently with the self-storage text amendment. We have recent examples of it, and it's, I appreciate that from your perspective, it was highly unusual, but from our perspective, know that it has happened before.
I will accept the modification to say highly unusual, but the purposes of this deferral is very clear and unequivocal what it is. Again, Commissioner Ortiz asked that as her first question. What is the purpose? It's to stop a single development. It's a rush to the grandfathering process, as is commonly known, and to stop the completion of our foundation.
Commissioner Levin. I wanted to raise a question about your comments about the public process here, because it seems to me that we really did start the public process, as your testimony indicated. The public process at least started with this commission back in June when the first text amendment was referred out. It ran into some policy difficulties, and I think what we're looking at now is not a brand-new application as you would have us understand it, but simply a modification, a reshaping, which has been, is now before us as apparently a new application, but let's be honest, this is a modification of the application that first got started, and in fact, I think the tower on the base rules are more flexible than the community initially wanted them to be. So I'm not sure where the absence of public process is such a concern here.
I would respectfully disagree. I believe, without any equivocation, first of all, the area encompassed by the original application, or if you prefer to say the modified application, is entirely different. Second, the modified application is a much broader geography and applies to many more people. But the net result of both of these applications is entirely different. One is a height limitation, this is a different tower on base application, and the people who are affected by it have a right to participate in this process. It's not the same people and it's not the same application, and frankly, as other people will testify in more detail, I think one would look at the objections to the EAS as being a very significant matter to comment on, which no one had the opportunity to do in the second go-round, if you will, Commissioner.
Commissioner Dees.
Thank you. You referenced my question, and I asked for this precise reason, and I don't know if we heard the same response. What I heard from the council person was a concern that's not limited to this neighborhood, that's not necessarily limited to this building. And so I'd just sort of like to state that, perhaps there was a difference of opinion in terms of what the answer to that was. And I would like to, follow up on Commissioner Levin's thinking and question about the process, because as you did say, the public hearing was very well attended. We can disagree about whether this particular application differs significantly from the first, but I think it's important that we note that there was a lot of outreach and there's a lot of public engagement that we don't often see, for every application. And I think that's important here as well to note. So, that might have played into the decision to waive, review for the second time. So I simply wanted to say that.
May I react briefly, Commissioner?
Was that a question, Commissioner, or just a statement?
No, it was a statement.
Yep. Commissioner Efron.
I just wanted to say thank you for sharing with us your concerns about the EIS, and understand that I'm sure we will read them and take them sincerely, and that the record will remain open, as I understand it, after this hearing, if there are additional questions you have, and we think that's a very important part of the public process.
Well, I thank you for that statement, certainly.
Other questions? Yes, Commissioner Doyle.
I'd just like to clarify, in your specific instance, will the tower on a base requirements, how much will they actually reduce the building size, or it's just a height limitation?
I believe it reduces both, if I'm correct. I certainly can provide that in very specific detail to you, Commissioner. I'd rather not say it in an incorrect answer at this moment, but it does. What it'll do, it'll make the development of this building non-functional. That I can tell you, but we'll give you specific detail.
I'd like to know on the actual buildable allowed.
Fair enough.
Versus the height. Thank you.
Other questions? Thank you, Mr.
very
Schlein.
much, Chair.
Our next speaker in opposition is Jeff Mulligan.
Good morning, Chair Lago and Commissioners. Jeff Mulligan from Kramer 11. I'm actually going to be reading a letter, you have copies of this, from Paul Goldberger. As many of you know, Mr. Goldberger served for 25 years as the architecture critic for the New York Times, and his criticism won a Pulitzer Prize, and for 15 years as the architecture critic of the New Yorker. And he has written numerous books on architecture. He currently serves as the Joseph Urban Chair in Design and Architecture at the Parsons School of Design of the New School. And he writes, Chair Lago, I share the concerns of many citizens about the widespread growth of very tall residential buildings in the city, most of which, as you know, were built as of right and never reviewed by the Commission. I am pleased that the Commission has now begun to seek some way, of bringing this type of building under its jurisdiction. However, I do not agree that the proposed text amendment is the correct way in which to do this. It would create an artificial zone that is neither supported by context, nor by precedent, nor by any direct planning logic. More important, its restrictions would meaningfully apply to only one site within this zone, 430 East 58th Street. That makes this amendment, in effect, a form of spot zoning and not a true zoning district at all. If the Commission is truly desirous of having a meaningful impact on the new skyline shaped by this new building type, the issue needs to be addressed thoughtfully and holistically in a way that at least takes into account all of Midtown, if not all of Manhattan. Spot zoning is not the way to go about it, and this amendment will not, in my view, increase the confidence of citizens that the Commission is engaging in the kind of deliberate and careful long-range planning that is central to its mission. Finally, a word about the design, We have thus far seen a range of architectural quality in this new building type of the super tall residential tower, from the mediocre to the excellent, and the proposed design by Thomas Jewell Hansen strikes me as having the potential to be at the higher end of this range. All of the new super tall towers have the virtue of being narrow, minimizing their shadow impact despite their height, which is different from the huge bulky masses of an earlier generation epitomized by the Sovereign just across 58th Street. The proposed design for 430 East 58th Street will have far less impact on light, air, and the overall cityscape than the Sovereign. It will be a pleasanter building to walk past and a more graceful addition to the skyline. Its facade is an elegant composition of masonry, which is welcome in what is increasingly becoming a city of glass. Stylistically, its architecture makes a serious, convincing effort to balance between the sharp modernism of one of its most prominent super tall neighbors, 432 Park Avenue, and the traditionalism of another, 520 Park Avenue. This new building is thus a thoughtful and informed response to a very different kind of context, the context of the new generation of Manhattan towers, and is signed Paul Goldberger.
Thank you. Questions for Mr. Mulligan, since we can't question Mr. Goldberger?
You cannot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker in opposition is Thomas Jewell Hansen.
Good morning. My name is Thomas Jewell Hansen, and I'm the designer of the building at 430 East 58th Street. We've heard a lot today about the horrific nature of tall buildings and how they can't be contextual and can't try to integrate and improve the streetscape. And my opinion is the opposite of this, which is that it is in fact possible to be respectful of the context in which we built. And because of this, I brought some renderings of the proposed design today. On the left side, you will see the base of the building, which in fact is, noticeably not a glass building that we're trying to insert into the context. This, in my opinion, is a building that respects its neighbors. It is a mix of course, glass, because we need fenestration in buildings. We have canopies that create a welcoming street atmosphere at night with lights and so on. And the building is in fact clad in limestone, which of course is a material often used in Sutton Place. The two other images I brought today are images that show the building in the bigger scale as opposed to what it might look like from the street. Because in my opinion, the truth of the matter is when you're standing on the street, what really tends to count more than anything is the base of the project. Once it sets back and it goes up, it's not really the same experience we have on the street. So the building on the image on the left, you'll see that in relationship to the buildings from the rest of the city and the building on the right here, it is in fact not the tallest building in any way, shape, or form. We have to immediate east of us, the Sovereign, which is a very tall building in regards to its context. And my opinion is that we have the ability to create a piece of architecture that is in once classic, in sort of a modern way, but at the same time also respectful of its context, not only in the local community, but also in the cityscape at large. And that's essentially what we're attempting to do. This is not a proposition by some overseas architect who may not live in the city. I've been here 20 years. I have not been fortunate enough to be born here, but I think there should be respect for those of us who have fought to live in this great city of ours. And I think that also the idea that the buildings that we create in the city are only occupied by foreigners and not people who are real New Yorkers is to me also a very strange concept. I consider myself a real New Yorker. I've been here 20-something years, which is, slightly half my lifetime. And I certainly feel much more connected to this town than Denmark, where I grew up. So I think it's important to note that we are building for the city. These are not full floors apartments in any way, shape, or form. There's a lot of apartments we're adding here, and they're not vastly enormous, billionaire apartments that we're building. This is a building that we foresee that New Yorkers will buy and live in, and like myself, have kids that go to the local stores and that go to the public schools here. I have 4 daughters in the public school system, and so I think, we deserve also to be part of what's considered real New Yorkers.
Questions? Perfect timing. Yes, Commissioner Efron.
Thank you. We're always glad to take Danish in New York. One of the arguments that those in favor of the application brought forward was the idea that the tower on the base would yield more smaller units. Could you give us a sense of how many units are proposed in this current building, and if at all possible, what another configuration would be if it were a tower on the base?
The idea that a tower on a base would configure different unit typology makes really no architectural sense to me. That there's no difference in terms of the type of units you can put in a tower, in terms of the size of units, versus what you can do in a tower base. So this is a postulation, in my opinion. It doesn't carry any real significance. We have a small floor plate. The footprint of the tower is 86 feet by 55 foot, so it's a very, very slender building, which was mentioned earlier that the amount of light and air that this building will steal is insignificant, in my opinion. Tower on a base will create a much wider street wall, and if anything, I would argue that this type of building, tower on a base, would make the street much, much darker and basically create almost a wall in a similar effect than one might argue that the sovereign behind us has created. In terms of the unit mix, we range from 1 bedrooms. It's basically about a third of the building are 1 bedrooms, a third of the building are 2 bedrooms, and a third of the building are 3 bedrooms. There are a couple of larger units at the very top of the building. We do have a big full floor penthouse apartment and so on, which is not atypical, but I'm not sure that one apartment really will render the usage of this building a billionaire status. So if we were to do a tower on a base on a different location, because I don't think you can build a tower on a base on this location, it would be the same unit mix that we would be looking at.
Thanks.
Commissioner Ortiz.
Hi, thank you for your testimony. Could you speak to how the application might change the gross amount that you might be able to build, if at all?
I don't think it's viable to build on the site with a tower of a base. In my opinion, the only way that would be possible would be to start demolishing additional townhouses along the side to get a much bigger footprint of a building and then build the square footage. And if the concern, of course, is that we want to save the rent stabilized, this would have the opposite effect.
So, under the current proposal, what would you see being viable here?
I don't think that one could build anything. I think there would be a massive loss financially for my clients. And, at the end of the day...
But something will be built. What do you see as an architect being built here? A 35-story building? Is what we've heard?
Well, I don't think you can build a 35-story building here with the tower and base proposition.
So, but can you answer that question? What would we end up with, a vacant lot?
You could rebuild what was there. You can rebuild a couple of townhouses and call it a day. You can try to recreate the past instead of accepting that, this is a progressive city where people move ahead, people look forward, they don't look backwards.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Levin?
Yeah, and I just want to observe, thank you for bringing these boards, because I think they illustrate the dilemma that's presented by this situation. You understandably put this tower in the context of the other super talls further to the west in the Manhattan, in the central part of Manhattan, which is admittedly much more commercial in character. And then the image on the right, I think demonstrates the challenge, because you have that very strong context along the river and Sutton Place. I know that's outside of the rezoning area, but it is part of the neighborhood context. If you look beyond, there are a few tall buildings, but there's nothing like what you have shown here in the center, or what you're proposing to build. And, context is in the eye of the beholder. For some, the new context is emerging with the super talls, and for others, the context is what's there right now. And I think the image on the right really shows us pretty vividly what the challenge is. So thank you for that.
Commissioner Reade.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's helpful you brought the rendering on the left that shows the building from the street and what the pedestrian would experience. So that's helpful. Thank you. I have a question regarding, I assume you bought, or the site is basically the footprint of the building, the width between the two tenement buildings on either side. But the zoning lot, is it a wider zoning lot? Have you acquired zoning or FAR from adjacent properties?
Yes, certainly.
Okay, and you're cantilevering over one or two buildings?
Yeah.
I get it. Okay.
Building on either side.
Got it. And how tall is the building ultimately?
It's 800 feet.
800. Okay, thank you very much.
Vice Chair Knuckles.
Could you just point out in the far right rendering, where is your building?
It's right here. You want me to bring it forward? Yeah, it's a little bit to see here.
Thank you.
So it's covered by the street wall, and the only way we can actually see the building is to get far away.
And then down to the other end.
I'll do this from that. Here.
Oh.
I'll do the little tour.
Yeah.
Other questions? Well, thank you, Mr. Joel Hansen. Our next speaker in opposition is Paimon Lodi.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Payman Lothy, representing the Real Estate Board of New York. REBNY opposes the proposed rezoning because it does not represent smart, rational planning, and its sole purpose is to block the construction of an as-of-right building currently under construction. This is not a contextual zoning, and it will negatively impact the production of affordable housing. It's hard to fathom that any community would support a rezoning in which affordable housing is diminished while shadow impacts are worsened. Perhaps the community board and the others involved would have noticed that if they did not waive their right to review prior to the EAS being finalized. This raises very big concern about transparency. The city has a responsibility to safeguard the public review process so that all members of the public have adequate time to review and provide feedback. For this application, the public has been given 16 days. Compare that to the theater subdistrict text amendment where the public had 161 days and several public forums from the time of certification to the City Planning Commission public hearing. This truncated review process is extreme and indefensible. Further, there is certainly the impression of impropriety that the co-applicants of the proposed action manipulated the public review process so as to hasten the review period and prevent public comments. The city prides itself on the fact that the vast majority of development is as of right, and it is critical that property owners have a reasonable degree of certainty in the status of existing zoning. This proposal is a frivolous and punitive endeavor that is unnecessary, that is an unnecessary drain on city resources and in no way advances the city's stated policy goals. In fact, they stand in direct contradiction to the goals of increasing housing production and providing good-paying jobs. We urge the Planning Commission to examine the facts and the motive behind this application and reject this proposal. Additionally, we ask that the Commission postpone action on this application by an additional 60 days to allow for sufficient public comment. Thank you.
Questions for Mr. Levy? Commissioner Reade.
Good afternoon. Good morning. Can you explain, this is the second time it's been mentioned, the impact of this application on affordable housing?
Yeah, I think it's related to the inclusionary housing bonus that would be generated that would not be used as a result of the tower on the base.
Commissioner Deleuze.
But the area doesn't currently have MIH, so it's only because of a rezoning that MIH would be mapped.
No, I think it's using the inclusionary housing. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Of course, I always forget about the R10. The old MIH.
The original inclusion. Other questions? Yes, Commissioner Ortiz.
I found your comment really interesting that, I'm paraphrasing here. No community would elect for context over affordability.
No, I said, it's hard to fathom a community voting to diminish housing and increase shadows. I mean, I think the exact words were, housing is diminished and shadows worsen.
Okay, because, I mean, one of the things that's been brought up, and I'm curious sort of what your position is that, there are very few residentially zoned neighborhoods in the city that have R10 zoning on narrow streets without contextual zoning. And what we heard from the community is that they feel like they're playing catch-up. This is something that they should have had, and they don't have now. And obviously, this proposal is creating a desire to address that issue. But, I guess in light of that, what sort of Rebney's position if this community is saying they very much would like the protections that other communities have?
Yeah, and we would have loved to have had that conversation with the community board if they had a public hearing on this application. We've had 16 days from the time of certification till now, including the holidays. We had to foil information. I mean, this is very truncated and it's extreme.
Other questions? Commissioner Levin?
Haven't you really had since June?
Well, we're talking
When
about
this is referred out.
since the new
Okay.
EAS.
But I think the notion of achieving some degree of contextual limitations is not a brand-new idea that you've not had a chance to weigh in on.
Well, I think I think it was raised before, it was that, there were concerns or errors that we'd like to address in the EAS, but the decision to vote to waive was actually done prior to the EAS actually being finalized.
We'll be taking a close look. Thank you.
Other questions? Thank you, Mr. Lodi. Our next speaker in opposition is Charles Lewis.
Good morning, Chair Lago, Vice Chair Knuckles, and the rest of the commission, the City Planning Commission. My name is Charles Lewis. I'm a member of Local 79 Construction Workers for Buildings. And as I'm listening on both ends, the pros and the cons of this spot zoning impact, there's something that I want to bring to your attention that really needs to be considered, and that's the quality of life that would be impacted if this was approved. For construction workers, especially minority construction workers such as myself, this puts us in a bad light that really needs to be considered. The impact that this would have, the downsizing of the size of this project and the number of jobs that would be available for individuals such as myself. So that's something that I wanted to share with you guys in hopes that you would consider that. There would definitely be an impact if this thing was to go forward. Thank you.
Questions for Mr. Lewis?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker in opposition is Adam Lubinsky.
Good morning, Chair and Commissioners. My name is Adam Lubinsky. I'm a principal at WXY Architecture and Urban Design. We're active in urban planning, urban design, architectural issues in New York City. We were brought on by Kramer Levin to conduct an urban design analysis of the area, including 58th Street through 52nd Street between Sutton Place and First Avenue. And I'm here to talk about the diversity of the building types in this area and the heterogeneity within this zone. Just to provide some context, since the late 1920s, the area south of the Queensboro Bridge between the East River and First Avenue has been characterized by a varied urban fabric with large footprint buildings along both avenues and the side streets, in contrast to the mid-blocks west of First Avenue, where you see a more traditional built form of townhomes. You can see that on the handout that we provided. Sutton Place is clearly a strong spine in the neighborhood where high street wall pre-war buildings are clustered along the corridor north of East 56th Street. Similarly, there's a strong historic built form on East 57th Street and East 52nd Streets, where the character continues till First Avenue. However, there are a large number of buildings within the neighborhood that were developed after 1941, and there's no historic district or landmark designation in the area. other than street lamp posts on the south side of Sutton Place at East 58th Street. Today, the built character of this area that we've been studying is very heterogeneous and includes townhomes, high street wall apartment buildings, and residential towers set back from the street, as shown on page 7 of our handout. Apart from a few townhomes to the north of East 57th Street, the build character along Sutton Place and East 57th Street is characterized by predominantly high street wall buildings with heights between 180 and 210 feet, rising sheer from the street line, and are one or two additional floors after a setback. Here, a street wall is very pronounced and representative of a clear and consistent built character across the corridors. While Sutton Place, East 57th, and East 52nd Streets have an established character, along the mid-blocks, a diverse range of typologies and building heights can be found. East 58th Street includes a 500-foot tower, which is set back from the street, occupying much of the northern block frontage, as well as two narrow towers and few lower-scale walk-up apartments up to 5 to 6 stories to the south. East 56th Street is predominantly lined with high street wall apartments, apartment buildings with overall heights ranging from 120 and 200 feet, and one large cruciform 363-foot tower set back from the street.
Thank you, Mr. Lubinsky. Questions? Commissioner Delos.
Mr. Lubinsky, I appreciate your testimony. I'm just wondering, we heard earlier from the attorney from the applicants that I believe she said 87% of the buildings in the area comply with heights of 185 feet on narrow streets and 210 feet on wide streets. Does your analysis agree with that?
We didn't make that calculation, so I can't speak for whether that's factual or not. We obviously mapped the streets. We looked at several towers throughout the area, but we didn't calculate the percentage that attorney spoke to.
Based on the analysis that you've done, would it be possible to do that?
We could certainly come back with that calculation.
I'd appreciate it.
Yes, Commissioner Efron.
Just because we've heard some testimony in opposition saying that the shadows would be greater if this application were to go through. Do you have an opinion about that? Is that accurate?
To be honest, we haven't looked at the proposal for this site. We haven't looked at tower on bases. We haven't looked at either of those to see their relative impacts.
Thanks. Commissioner Ortiz.
Hi, how are you? A question, oh my gosh, I lost my train of thought. This was, you know what, come back to me.
Anyone want to help out, Commissioner Ortiz?
Rhymes with.
Yeah, no, actually, it was a follow-up to Michelle's question in terms of context. I'm curious what your perspective is on the issue that was raised by the community, which is that these very, very tall buildings, are not particularly contextual, that they're concerned. We heard from the councilman that, it's not just this neighborhood, but it's other neighborhoods. As an architect who's, I think, design perspective, I appreciate, what conclusion do you come to? I understand that you're hired in this case, by the applicant, but, what do you think about that issue?
I think it's something that clearly needs to be studied. I think a tower and a base would also clearly need to be studied. I think, what we've looked at from the ground plane perspective, particularly, is the types of buildings that are there now. And I think there's a question that should be researched, both in terms of slender towers and tower and bases in this area. It's an extremely diverse area, and it requires further study in that fashion.
Well, I think we've heard that there has been study. I mean, that's exactly what Commissioner Delos was mentioning, that we have in fact been told by DCP that 89% of the buildings are at or below the maximum height permitted by quality housing regulations, which is 185 on narrow streets and 210 on wide streets. And so, the community is saying to us, that's our context. So, I guess the question of whether it needs to be studied more or, it remains an open question. And clearly some folks think that we've looked at that issue and maybe, as Commissioner Levin said, context is in the eye of the beholder.
Other questions? Thank you, Mr. Lubinsky. Our next speaker in opposition is Stephen Jacobs.
Just want to look at the clock. It's still morning. Good morning. Chairman Lago and Commissioners.
Can you move the microphone up to you?
Okay. Good morning, Chairman Lago and Commissioners.
A little more, sir.
Can you speak a little louder? How is that?
A little better.
Excellent. My name is Stephen Jacobs. My firm, the Stephen B. Jacobs Group, is the executive architect for the development at 430 East 58th Street. I'm a fellow of the American Institute of Architects and have actively practiced architecture in this city for over 50 years, which is hard to believe looking at. But in all of this time, I've witnessed and participated many, many zoning changes. I have never seen a zoning change being pushed through in such haste. I'm here to testify in opposition to the proposed text amendment. The tower on the base form that is proposed to be mapped on narrow streets in the Sutton Place neighborhood was originally mapped in the city on avenues and wide streets in the early 1990s in an effort to control the height of towers. The resulting bulk responded directly to the context of the Upper East Side by requiring a base height that related to the tenements along the avenues, but still allowed towers in the 20 to 40-story range. The height of these towers was controlled by a minimum 30-foot tower coverage requirement and bulk packing requirements, which led to wider but shorter towers than the thinner, taller towers that were being developed in the 1980s. These chunkier towers cast wider shadows, moving and immediately surrounding than the thinner towers, but were considered appropriate for avenues because of the widths of the streets. Now, I will elaborate on that a little bit later. The proposal to map the tower on the base form on narrow streets is misguided. The wider towers that result from the coverage and bulk packing requirements will create a canyon effect on the narrow streets. This can readily be seen in the views of the EAS with action condition. The two wide towers on East 58th Street shown in the EAS measure approximately 140 feet in width versus the 86-foot wide of our one tower. Two wide towers would have a devastating impact on this block, casting much more of a shadow all day, especially when combined with the massive, approximately 300-foot wide, 485-foot tall Sovereign on the north side of the block, which, by the way, was built with a zoning variance that allowed it to exceed a maximum 12 FAR, as well as adding 2 additional stories. You can easily see that what happens in this block. This is the Sovereign on the north side of the street. The shadow of the Sovereign already cast way beyond the street. And with these 2 additional buildings, I mean, forget about sunlight in this particular block. Our proposed building, by contrast, would use the same floor area as the buildings in EIS, but in a narrow, taller tower that would have much less of a shadow impact on the immediate streets and blocks.
Thank you. Vice Chair Knuckles.
So, Mr. Jacobs, the rendering, it's not a rendering, well, the massing.
This is from the EAS.
This is from the EAS?
Yes.
Okay.
And it clearly is a fiction because these, with the exception of our 60-foot footprint, the rest of these are part of the air rights parcel, all occupied buildings where the air rights already have been sold to our particular site. That's why if you approve this zoning change, there can be no development on the site. I would love to elaborate. You've asked a question before on how a tower on the base would affect our particular project. I would love to respond to that if you
Is
give
that
me
your
an
question?
opportunity.
Respond.
Thank you very much. You have to keep in mind, our footprint parcel, that's what we control, has a 60-foot width. We have a right to cantilever to the east 10 feet and 15 feet to the west. That creates a tower or a maximum base height of approximately 86 feet. Now take into consideration that the maximum tower permitted, maximum, not minimum, maximum tower permitted on this zoning lot would be 30% of the entire zoning lot. This is an immense zoning lot. So basically, I haven't done the calculation, but I don't believe you could build any tower above the maximum base height. And to pack 50% of the bulk below the base height would really render this site unbuildable. And I think you really have to take this seriously. That basically, this is a fantasy because these are occupied buildings. The air rights have already been transferred. You can't just arbitrarily propose to tear down occupied buildings that already have no air rights because the air rights have been allocated to a different parcel on the zoning law. This is a fantasy.
Other questions for Mr. Jacobs? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Our next speaker in opposition is Robert Kulikowski.
Good morning, Chair Lago, Commissioners. Thank you for the opportunity to present this testimony. My name is Robert Kulikowski, and I'm the former director of the Mayor's Office of Environmental Coordination, a position I held for nearly 12 years. MOEC is the seeker, the Environmental Review Office for the city, and is responsible for the production of the seeker technical manual, as well as overseeing environmental reviews for the Mayor's Office. Following my city service, I joined Langen, where I currently lead the planning practice with the responsibility for producing environmental review documents for a variety of projects. Just to recap what Mr. Tarnoff said at the beginning, we believe that the reasonable worst-case development scenario is seriously flawed and that it's based on unrealistic assumptions. You've heard several speakers say that the air rights have already been transferred from other properties to the development site at Sutton 58, which is the premise that the EAS is based upon. The with action condition also assumes that the development rights that have been sold to the tower now under construction would return to the original owners to allow for new construction. This is just not reasonable. We performed a technical review at the request of our client of the EAS and the neg deck for the modified proposal. We find that the EAS is fraught with inconsistencies and errors, making it difficult to follow and understand. Some of these include the development program under the no action condition as summarized in Table 1.1-2 of the EAS contains errors in its calculation of total gross square feet of development and total dwelling unit count. Simply put, the numbers were incorrectly totaled. It appears that Site 1B's gross square footage was were not counted. Moreover, in the no action condition, Lot 22 is inconsistently described as, quote, remaining as under existing conditions and as, quote, to be redeveloped. It's unclear then what the actual development assumption is for this lot. These fundamental errors and inconsistencies in the no action condition, as well as the unrealistic assumptions for the reasonable worst case development scenario, establish a faulty baseline upon which the with action condition and increments for analysis are based. Ultimately, these fatal flaws cascade throughout the EIS, in particular on the quantitative and qualitative analyses of the various technical areas. The consequence is that all the assessments of the technical areas that were analyzed incorporate those flaws and inconsistencies.
I would like just to take a minute or so to address some just very specific issues with the technical areas that were analyzed. First,
I'm afraid, Mr. Kulikowski, if you could submit your written testimony, we would be glad to
Yes,
review
we
it.
will submit a detailed question.
Yes, Commissioner Efron.
Yeah, I think we all look forward to reading the list, but can you characterize it as substantially flawed or substantially flawed?
yeah,
Or is this clerical error?
No, I don't think, well, I mean, there's some clerical errors and just, inconsistencies in numbers and stuff, but I think based on the reasonable worst-case development scenario that was put forth, in my opinion, that's not a reasonable worst case. I mean, that I realize that is a subjective determination, and it's up to the lead agency to agree or not agree with that. In my opinion, I would recommend to the lead agency that this would not be a reasonable worst case.
Thank you.
Other questions? Commissioner Ortiz.
Hi, I'm just trying to understand, and I'm not sure if you can answer this question, but what happens contractually to the air rights? They have been purchased. The owners of the buildings adjacent to this have received the payment. The building, say they're not able to move forward. What happens?
I guess I would defer to a land use attorney to really tell you that. It's not part of, you don't have to do an environmental review to transfer air rights.
Thank you.
Other questions? Yes, Commissioner Levin.
Did your look at the environmental review really just focus on your client's parcel, or did you look at the
Well, no,
broader?
we looked at the entire EAS, and which is focused on our client's parcel.
Are there other soft sites in the
Not
area that's affected here?
Not identified in the EAS, although the EAS that was published in June did describe other soft sites. I think we've learned some additional information about some of those. Just as an aside, this is sort of funny, on Friday I moved to 36 Sutton Place South. And one of the soft sites identified in the June EAS is the tennis courts over the garage right behind my building. But apparently that, all the development rights have been transferred from that site, so it's no longer considered a soft site. But we're in the process of going through all that analysis now to provide your comment
Okay,
letter.
that too would be helpful.
Sure.
Your take on the broader effect that this application would have in the rezoning area would be very valuable.
Other questions? Thank you, Mr. Kulikowski.
Sure.